a report released last week, the Auditor General chronicled the horrendous conditions on First Nations Reserve, noting that not much has changed in the 10 years since they began their audits on First Nation policies. Reserve homes are full of mold, drinking water is unsafe, and education remains a huge, huge problem. In fact, on some reserves there are no schools. If there are schools, they're unheated. In one case, one of the schools was infested by snakes. And not surprisingly, the proportion of high school graduates over the age of 15 is 41% on reserves. This is compared to 77% in the rest of Canada. So we're going to focus today on education on First Nations reserves, and to help us, we are joined in Timmins by Charlie Angus. He's the NDP MP for Timmins-James Bay. Here in the studio with me in Ottawa is Chief Gilbert White Duck, a chief of a reserve just north of here, an Algonquin Indian. So I want to start first with Mr. Angus. And to talk about Shannon's dream, because you have really promoted the cause of the young woman who was tragically killed last year, who was trying to get a school on a reserve in your riding, Mr. Angus. Just talk about that and how that reflects on this Auditor General's report.
Well, Jane, I think the situation that the children faced in my community of Attawapiskat exemplifies the systemic negligence that the First Nation children have been subjected to. This is a community where kids have been educated on a toxic field for 30 years. The school's been closed for 10 years. We've got study after studies, commitment after commitment, and yet these kids, 400 plus kids, have been educated in dilapidated portables. In 2008, the government broke yet another promise, said this school wasn't going to happen, it wasn't a priority, and that's when the kids actually said enough. And one of those youngsters was Shannon Coustache, and there was just something about Shannon and her heartfelt plea that actually opened, I think, a lot of Canadians' eyes, and we launched this movement to fight for that school. Shannon was nominated for the International Children's Peace Prize for her work on the fight to get education for children. Okay. She died last June in a horrific car accident, but the fight is really mobilizing now.
Yeah, and Chief White Duck, in your community, is there a school? I mean, you've been fighting for this education rights for a long time, but what's happening in your community?
Well, we do have a school, and we've had it since 1980, and because we pressured the government to put something in place, we have the full grade levels from grade 1 to secondary 5 in Quebec. And as a matter of fact, we're quite unique. We offer and give our own high school diploma. There are only 2 schools in Canada that proceed in that fashion. And it is recognized by colleges, it's recognized by universities and whatnot. We've pushed the limit because we believe and know that education is the cornerstone of any community development. The problem we encounter, of course, is lack of resourcing, lack of second-level services, the kind of things that have been discussed for decades and decades. I've been around close to 4 decades now pursuing this, and it's unacceptable that First Nations youth and students are caught with this reality that they can't get the quality education that other Canadians receive.
Yeah, Charlie Angus, it's sort of, you know, 2 groups, one for sort of the kids in the urban areas in the south, and then one for the kids on the reserves. Why is this happening? It seems to be a no-brainer that every kid in Canada, in a rich country like Canada, should have the same education.
Well, Jane, part of it is the fact that there are absolutely no standards set by INAC. I was a school board trustee in a small northern school board out of Timmins. Every school board in the country has to meet certain standards for class size ratios, for school planning. You look at Indian Affairs, they've done nothing of the sort, and they refuse to do that. So you end up with incredible disparities where, for example, kids in Saskatchewan or Attawapiskat have really no school. In another isolated northern reserve, Fort Albany, we have a good school, but we don't have the resources. We've got kids being educated in tents in one community, and in another we've got not a pretty good infrastructure. The problem is the government just won't meet the basic standards for organizing education that we see in any provincial system.
But the problem, too, is that you have a lot of money. INAC gets a lot of money. In fact, I think the budget's almost the same as defense. Yet, money doesn't seem to be the problem, and it can't solve this problem.
Well, first of all, I mean, there's about $1.4 billion spent on elementary and secondary education, 118,000 students, 60% who attend First Nation schools. And in all the studies that we have carried out, we've demonstrated that we're receiving about $2,000 less per student than what provincial schools get. And often provincial schools have added funding put in for a variety of things, from technology to libraries to breakfast programs and whatnot, that we don't get. So we've demonstrated that, but nobody's hearing the message. And I'm hoping that Canadians understand that education is the key. If we're going to get out of poverty, develop stronger governance, stronger accountability, it's got to begin by education.
By educating the younger kids and then bringing them up so that they can run the communities.
Exactly. Or, you know, we prepare our students to go anywhere in the world. It's not a matter of coming back to the reserve. We want to give them choice. We want to give them the tools. We want to make sure that they understand who they are as an Anishinaabe, whatever nation they belong to, that they have their language and they feel good. And then they can truly contribute to Canada in a very positive way. But we must remember also that we have a lot of talent in our First Nations communities, and a lot of students are graduating. They're often not seen or heard about, but there are a lot of success stories also. It's not all negative.
Right. Yeah, Charlie Angus, you were in some interviews that I heard you or saw you on this week talking about the Auditor General's report. You did seem to talk a little bit about that you feel that there's more hope. Now, why are you saying that today?
I think we are beginning to turn a corner. If you're asking me, do I think that by the government meeting and talking that they're actually going to do what's right? No, but I think we've got them talking. I think a door's been open. But what I think has changed this time from the past is I think general Canadian society, their eyes have really been open to some of the horrific conditions that kids are being exposed to. Just this past week, our First Nation children from our region, from other regions, took a report that's going to the United Nations. I think Canadians are fed up. They want to know why it is that we have a system set up in Canada where one class of students are systemically discriminated against in terms of their educational opportunities, in terms of their funding, in terms of any of the other rights that children in Canada have. With that awareness, I think the government will have to act, and I believe this is the year that things might start to change.
Chief Whiteduck, you had confronted Chuck Strahl, the former Indian Affairs Minister, last year. You told me for schools, for education, to no avail. Are you hoping that John Duncan, the new minister, might be a little bit more open to what you have to say?
Well, I had the opportunity of meeting Minister Duncan when he was Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indian Affairs a few years ago. He did come to the community. I had a chance to have a long chat with him. I believe that if anyone is going to do it, it'll be Mr. Duncan. I know he has a very unique approach, and that's why our communities are offering to work with INAC. We don't want INAC or the minister to impose anything on our community. It's got to be developed from the community, and I believe that can be successful. I believe we have the capacity of making something happen in the coming year and years that's really going to change this negative profile that the Auditor General has repeatedly indicated in her reports.
Okay, I want to thank you, gentlemen. A very thoughtful discussion today. Charlie Angus joining us from Timmins. Of course, he's the NDP MP. Chief Gilbert Whiteduck, thank you very much.
Miigwech.